Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. This morning we have with us from Binary Stream, Jerry Taylor, and Jerry's going to be presenting on Modernize Your Multi-Company Processes with an Industry-Leading ERP. And I know you're all eager to get started with the presentation, so before we begin, as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And if you do have any questions during our presentation, please feel free to type them into the questions box and we will answer them at the end of our session during our Q&A time. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Jerry to kick off our presentation.
Thanks, Angie, and thanks so much for having us today. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. As Angie mentioned, my name is Jerry Taylor, and I'm a solution consultant here at Binary Stream Software. Today, we're going to be discussing multi-company processing and how to manage many companies inside of a single Business Central company with our multi-entity management product. And I'll just point out that we call it MEM for short. It's a little bit easier to say, and so just keep that in mind as I go throughout the presentation today. So just getting started and talking a little bit about who we are. So especially for those of you that may not know, Binary Stream has been developing solutions as a major ISV for Microsoft across the Dynamics platforms for just over 20 years now. So I'm not going to go through all of these details, but if there were a couple of points that I'd highlight, one of the key ones would be that we've been designated as a Microsoft preferred solution. So what that means is that Microsoft trusts us. That's really important to us, and it means a lot. Then if there's another one, if we just take a look at the timeline along the bottom, that we've been a member of the President's Club multiple times over the years. So we have history, we have longevity, and we're global. We're all over the world, and we work in many, many different industries around the world. So if we go back 20 years ago, we actually started with MEM as our flagship product on Dynamics GP. So we really understand what customers are looking for when it comes to dealing with multiple companies. In 2018, we extended MEM to Business Central, and today we can continue to develop all of our products, and that would be MEM included, really based on those features and functionality that are most important to you as a customer. So if we talk about the benefits, as I just mentioned, MEM has been designed to allow you to work with as many companies as you like in one Business Central company. So when you can do that, whether you're working with 2 companies or maybe 200 companies, the gains in efficiency and accuracy can be pretty darn significant. And maybe that efficiency is just a streamlined transaction entry. So with MEM, there's no more logging in and logging out to work with the various companies. We're going to take care of that part. Then when we think about security and user access to those companies, it really becomes so much simpler when you're now working within a single company. So now you'll no longer maintain separate sets of master records. That really eliminates redundancies. And then the security to share or restrict that access is very, very simple. Probably one of the most important benefits that I think is the increased visibility you're going to have on corporate performance with our consolidated reporting. And so then what does that really look like? And this diagram here, it's a little bit busy, but it's a really great visual representation where the image on the left is standard Business Central without MEM. That's where you're going to have multiple companies and multiple logins. Of course, each company now has its own chart of accounts, its own set of master records, and then you have a business unit for consolidations. Well, that works fine, of course, because Business Central is a world-class product, but to really enhance efficiencies, that's going to be the image on the right. It's the same Business Central infrastructure, but now we're embedding it with MEM, so you have one Business Central company, one set of master records for vendors, customers, items, locations, fixed assets, and so on. And then the MEM security settings are going to allow you to really easily share those records or not share those master records, just depending on your own business requirements. Then we'll talk about intercompany, and this is where it gets really exciting, because if there is intercompany, the MEM business logic is going to handle both the due tos and due froms on the transactions automatically. So from a transactional point, let's consider that for just a moment. And this invoice allocation is actually one of the examples I'm going to show you during the demo. This is a cross-company allocation, and it really begins to show how we can refine processes. So the top diagram is a purchase invoice allocation. It's a standard Business Central process, which works just fine. However, it does take a number of steps, as you can see. Then the bottom diagram is going to be the same process now with MEM. It's a pretty big difference. We've cut those steps in half, and then we added one. It's our very own allocation template that's going to allow you to very easily allocate revenue or expenses across companies. That becomes really significant, if your business environment has many companies, because now you'll work as if you're in a single company, yet you're still able to affect as many companies as you need to, and then of course have that intercompany due to and due from automatically handled in that single transaction window. Another benefit I'm going to show you with MEM is when it comes to reporting. So we know from our clients that consolidated reporting is a priority. So once again, with Business Central at the top diagram, you can see the steps. And then once it's set up, it's great, and you can access all of your reports just as you need. But when we look at the steps with MEM, I'm simply going to bring up the report, and at that point, select the companies I want to run it for, and that's it. I run the report. I don't have to select consolidations. I don't have to amalgamate any data. I'm just going to select any combination of companies I want to report on. So now this becomes very, very powerful to be able to just take those 9 steps down to 2. So with that, I'm going to take this into the demo environment, and you can see it in action. But first, here's the plan for today. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes showing you how companies are defined. And then, really, because MEM provides value across many different verticals, whether it's manufacturing or distribution or retail, hotels, restaurants, that's really just to name a few of the types of clients we have. But we're going to focus today, because of that, on just an area of functionality that applies to everybody. And I'm calling it a day in the life for purchasing. It's, relatable because every company has bills to pay. And then you'll see the power of intercompany with MEM. So this is really the good stuff, where I'll go behind the scenes on a transaction and you can see the MEM logic that's going to be built in. And that's where you'll get to see intercompany in action and understand exactly what happens with due tos and due froms. And then, last but definitely not least, we'll wrap up with the MEM primary benefits, and that's reporting and that increased visibility you're going to have on your corporate performance with our consolidated reporting. So I'm just going to switch now over to my Business Central environment. And now when this comes up, one of the really great things is with the Business Central extensions is once we install MEM, it's built right into Business Central. So you just carry on with your normal business processes. And that means none of the standard Business Central functionality changes in any way. We're just adding the multi-company aspect inside of a single Business Central login. So now we need to be able to identify those companies, separate them, maintain any necessary security restrictions. So that question is, how do we do that? And I'm going to start first of all with dimensions. So I'm going to come up to my search bar, type in for dimensions, pull that up, and keeping in mind the dimensions are really that key aspect of Business Central for filtering, reporting, tracking your financial information, and that's where MEM starts. It's really why it's so powerful, because we're utilizing and assigning one of the 2 global dimensions to identify our company. So here I've got a dimension label called company. This has actually already been assigned as my global dimension 1. So if I go into my dimension values, you can see here I've got 10 different dimension codes with descriptions, and these values now represent my companies. That's why we can have an unlimited number of companies. Going forward, if you're scaling or growing your business, if I were to add a new value here, that would then represent a new company. As simple as that. All I have to do is type in the code, and I have a new company that is available for transaction entry. There, might be a little bit more configuration you're going to do, but it really is as simple as that. So this is standard Business Central functionality, but we've added a MEM entity setup window here. And really, I'm going to call this the company setup window. This is where you can put in some basic defaults, the legal name, your EIN numbers. If you wanted to have a logo that shows up on different purchase orders or sales invoices on an individual logo per company, you can assign that here. And then a whole bunch more fine tuning that you could do if you wanted to, which is optional. So now that we've got the companies set up, let's take a quick look at some basic MEM setup. And really there's a lot of different things here, but we're just going to take a look at the few of the options, and we're going to focus on intercompany and security. So starting here, first of all, multi-entity management. The most important thing here is I've said I'm using Global Dimension 1 to identify the company. Once I've assigned that global dimension is now locked in and used exclusively for companies. So now every single transaction is going to be tagged with a company code. It's going to be kept separate and reported on as such. But the next level here is security. And this is the starting point where I said, now we've got one set of master records, which is great for eliminating that data redundancy. If you share customers or vendors and have the same customer or vendor across companies, right now you have to create that record multiple times, and anytime there's a change to address or contact, you have to log into all the companies and make that change. Now you don't have to do that. But you might want to say that, for example, not every customer can be used with every company, whereas you might leave your items open, that those items get shared equally across all the companies. But this is the starting point. So I've made a couple of selections here where I'm going to restrict my access to these records by company. And then again, you can see there's a lot of additional fine tuning and configuration that can be done for your own business requirements. But coming back in here, we're going to talk just about security for users and master records. And this is really where we specify that data governance. How that works is users have access to companies and companies have access to master records. So if we take a look here at our user security, this is the standard Business Central user list here. And if I just put in myself as an example, down below, these are all of our company values that we've set up. So now I'm going to indicate which companies a user has access to. So that means when I log in, I'll only be able to enter transactions, see inquiries, and report details for the specific companies I have access to. So here, out of these 10, I've only given myself access to 6, and you're going to see why this is important in a few moments when we take a look at transactions. So once I set up my user security, the next step in that is going to be determining the master records, and you define which companies can access which master records. So here's the list of all of my different master records, and I can determine this if I'm using security, which is optional, which companies have access to what. So if I take a look at the customer example I mentioned, this is my head office. This is my full list of master records, and head office has access to all of them. But I can also get really granular. And let's say, for example, my company 400, you can see now that company 400 has a much more restricted list. When we enter a transaction for that company, the customer list is only going to display these records that are checked here. So as a user, there's no confusion. There will be nothing else in the list to select from. So that makes it really simple. And I'm showing you here a one-by-one basis method for making these selections, but just know that we have import functions available so that you can do mass updates on all of the setup windows for that matter. So if we just did a quick recap, we've added our companies, we looked at high-level setup, assigned the global dimension, and we talked about the user access to companies and filtered our master records. So now we're going to talk about intercompany. So if we talk about intercompany, keeping in mind we're running all of our companies in one Business Central using dimensions, Business Central is never going to suggest those due to and due from accounts, so we need to set those up here. Now, based on the dimensions that we set up, we're going to add due to and due from that are going to be picked up for every single type of transaction that MEM is installed for. And if we notice, I've got both AP and AR for both the originating and the destination companies. So once this is set up, MEM is automatically going to determine when a transaction is intercompany, and you can see I've got this set up for all of my different company relationships, and the due to and due from are going to be automatically balanced on that single transaction window without any user intervention required. So we're going to see this coming up next. This is really a set it and forget it type window. You're never going to have to come back in here unless, of course, you add a new company and you need to create those additional intercompany due to and due from accounts. Once again, we've got that import function available. So that's the basic setup for the intercompany. Now, there's one other window here, the org structure. That's where if you have more than one or more subsidiaries rolling up to a parent, there are options in here, so some additional deeper configuration where you can determine whether or not due to and due froms can occur between subsidiaries, or you might have layers of due to and due from that roll up from a sub to a parent and from a parent to a holding company, and that's also available there, so just keep that in mind. But that's the basics for setup. That's how we're going to determine our companies, our data governance for which users have access, and whether or not a company can work with master records, and what's going to happen when it's an intercompany transaction. So let's get a look at an actual transaction. You can see this in action, and I'm going to start with the purchase invoice. So when I come in here, purchase invoice, this is the standard Business Central list of unposted purchase invoices, but now we've added the company code here. So now you can really easily at a glance see which company the transaction belongs to, and security is enabled. So I'm only going to see the records for the companies I have access to. Now from a user easeability and transaction entry, creating a transaction for all of the companies occurs here. You'll just simply select which company the transaction belongs to, and you can see my list is now filtered. The security is in play, and I can only see those companies I have access to. There's no visibility that there's any more companies other than these listed here. So if I just back out of here, I'm going to come into a transaction I've already created, and this is, again, the standard Business Central window, but we've added the company field here at the header. This determines ownership of the transaction. And then we've added the company code down here at the line level. So while you might have a single company transaction like is shown here, and most of the time these two will match, I could also go ahead and say, I actually want to assign this expense to a different company. I can select based on the companies I have access to, and I can put this here at the line level. In fact, I could put any other companies on multiple lines to be able to allocate this expense across other companies. But as soon as I've done that, I've now got an intercompany transaction. So no longer is this the simple debit to expense and a credit to liability. Now I need those due to and due from based on what we set up. So when I come into the distribution, I'll see that here. So now on my GL entry preview window, I've got the company code here. This determines which financials this particular GL line are going to be tracked and reported on. So on this main line, I've got the expenses now going to my company 100. I can see that the liability is going to my head office. This is where it's going to sit on the subledger. And now my due to and due from are populated here automatically. So that's a really simple example. A single one-line transaction, and those due tos and due froms are going to pick up automatically. But let's get a more kind of detailed example. And we talked about the ability to work with all of our companies on this single transaction. And we've added a really cool allocation template. So in here, we created the ability where you might want to allocate based on a certain percentage across all of your companies. And so this gives you the ability to have an unlimited number of templates. And if I come in and show you what that looks like, this is going to take me back to the setup. So every time I use this template on a transaction, it's going to allocate based on this setup. It's going to allocate to these companies that I've assigned based on these percentages. And we can even go deeper into this where we can add additional dimension attributes. So I've said I want to track department. This is going to add the department to my distribution as well. But I've only added it to my head office. I just add it where you need it. And so now when I use this and I come in now and take a look at the distributions, this is going to be very different. Now I've got an 18-line distribution just by adding that allocation template. So now we've got the head office. You can see 2 lines and it's broken out by department. Then I've got the allocation to each company, company 500 and the associated due tos and due froms. And company 400 the same, company 300, and then we go all the way down. We can see that there's still my head office is going to be on the balance sheet. That's control account on the head office subledger. But all of these due tos or due froms are happening automatically. So this could really get quite complicated, right? We've got this 18-line distribution. That's a lot of entries for a user, but with MEM, it's not. It's going to be balanced every single time without having to go anywhere else or complete any additional steps. So in this case, when I post the transaction, it's going to update the P&L expenses for all 6 companies. It's going to update the balance sheet for my head office, and it's going to update these due tos and due froms without having to log into these other 5 companies to post the other side of the transaction. So that becomes really very powerful. So that's the purchase invoice side of things and how we can really easily allocate our expenses to other companies. But you know, that allocation template used here can be used on any transaction, any journal. So whether it's a general journal or an inventory transaction or a sales invoice, it can be used for revenue or expenses wherever you need it. And you can have as many of those allocation templates set up as you like. You can see I've got quite a few already set up here. All of them have different allocations and percentages for those different purposes. Maybe it's a general journal entry and it's month end and you've got either shared services or management fees that you typically allocate based on that fixed percentage. It makes it much easier to just add that. Then it's a single line transaction, really simple for the user. They don't have to worry about those due to and due from accounts. So now that we've got our purchase invoices done, I'll just back out of here. And we're going to take a look at the payments. And this is another really great example of how to work with multiple companies in a single window, because we can create a batch and make payments across all of our companies within one single batch. And we can do that 2 ways. We can do either a centralized batch or a decentralized payment batch. And what that means, say for centralized, maybe we've got one single bank account. We'll say it's owned by our head office, and our head office bank account makes payments on behalf of all of the other companies. It pays the bills off of their subledger. So when that happens, there's going to be a due to and a due from implication, and MEM Business Logic is going to handle that. Whereas decentralized means each company has its own bank accounts and they pay their own bills on their own behalf. So there's no due to and due froms, but we can still handle that within a single batch window, and I'll show you that. So the first example I'm going to show you is the centralized. Coming in to suggest vendor payments, these are all the standard filters for determining the criteria for the payment batch. We've got this decentralized button here, that's a MEM field. It's turned off right now. I'm going to be doing a centralized batch. We've also added the company field. So now I can determine which companies are going to be included just by selecting them here. And let's say I use these 3 companies. So now this makes it really easy. You don't have to go ahead and put together your batch creation for a single company and run a batch multiple times. I can do this in one single step. So now when I say okay, and this comes up, it's going to pull in all of those payments based on that criteria. And notice my company code here. This indicates which company's subledger these payments belong to. So I've got multiple companies included here. But if we come over here and look at the vendor, notice I've got Fabricam is listed here 3 times. So Fabricam is a shared vendor and has payments within different companies. The same with United Cooperative and First Step Consultants. But if we come over here and take a look at the bank account, it's a centralized batch where all of the payments are coming out of the bank account owned by the head office. So you can see there's going to be no due to and due from for the first line, but there will be due to and due from for the second line because this payment sits on a different company's subledger and is being paid by the head office bank account. So MEM Business Logic is going to manage that for you automatically. So now this is really simple. I can very easily issue my checks for all of my company's payables out of a single bank account. So that's a centralized scenario. We can also do it, as I mentioned, decentralized, and I've already got a batch set up here. And I've said, in this case, I'm making payments out of companies 3, 4, and 5, which you can see listed here. Companies 3, 4, and 5 comes off of their subledger. Once again, I've got shared vendors here. Fabricam has transactions in both company 300 and company 500. But as we scroll over here, you can see the bank accounts are different. So even though they're different bank accounts, I can still do this in the same batch. So if you imagine if you've got blank check stock and you're using microprinting, then those appropriate bank details are going to print on those checks for you. Or if you're doing EFT files and you're going to create a separate EFT file for each bank account. So this will be grouped based on the individual bank account when it creates that file. So that's really some great examples of what you can do on the purchasing side of things. And that's the examples we're using today. But I just want to point out that it doesn't matter if it's purchasing or a sales invoice, a general journal, maybe it's jobs or inventory transfer, and even manufacturing. The functionality that I'm showing you here in purchasing is going to be exactly the same in any one of those transaction windows where you're going to have a company on the header, you're going to have a company on the lines so that you can track that data, keep it separate. And then if there's intercompany, the MEM Business Logic is automatically going to populate those due tos and due froms for you. So that's great on the transaction side of things. Let's go a step further and consider the inquiries and then the reporting. So imagine, if you will, in the case of purchasing, and I showed you that the Fabricam vendor is shared and transacts in multiple companies. So, you know, what does that look like when you need to look up information? And if we go to the posted purchase invoices, here's all the posted purchase invoices, and you can see I've got, you know, many transactions for different companies. Once again, only those companies that I have access to. But let's say that Fabricam calls up and says, you know, I've got an invoice that hasn't been paid. What's happening? And if you're the AP manager and you're asking, well, you know, I've got the invoice number, what company does that actually belong to? Well, Fabricam may not tell you. To them, it doesn't matter. Just they've got an invoice that's unpaid. So in here, all you have to do is come in and do a search on that document number. It's going to filter directly to that transaction. It happens to be for company 300, but you can see that that doesn't even really matter anymore. Not from the point of looking up information. You don't have to know that information ahead of time to be able to drill down exactly to the information you're looking for. Of course, you could always be filtering by company, and then all of those same functions like sending stuff out to Excel is available to you. But the ease of looking up information is going to be very straightforward. It becomes even easier than when you're dealing with multiple companies, much less cumbersome than having to log in and log out to figure out what you're looking for. The same is going to hold true for on the reporting side of things. So if we come into reporting, I'll go back into search and type in MEM. You're going to see down here, there's all kinds of reports here. It says 50 right here, but we've got many, many more than that. And I'm going to start with the subledger and continue on with the vendor trial balance. So we've got two ways of, let's try this. We've got two ways of generating reports. So here we've got the summary trial balance and the detailed trial balance. But you can see I've got a trial balance and a trial balance by entity. The difference between those is whether you're going to get a consolidated report or an individual report by company but you can print for many companies at the same time. Let's take a look at the consolidated report. And here I'm going to get a consolidated report based on whatever combination of companies that I want to be including here. So I can be selective and randomly select. In this case, I'm going to select all of them. And I'm going to say, based on, we know that Fabricam is a shared vendor. I'll put a date in here. And then I've got the same options for Business Central to send it to Excel, to PDF, to Word, or to the Business Central scheduler if I like. But in this case, I'm just going to preview this. Because we're sharing this vendor, we're never going to lose any visibility. We're never going to lose any access to the information. It's all going to be kept separate and reported on as such. But when I get my consolidated total, here I've got my company code, my different filters. There's the grand total for Fabricam across all my companies. I can see the total liability, what's due for Fabricam if I'm going to be paying across all my companies. But maybe it's not just that. Maybe it's just for informational purposes and analysis. I want to see how much I'm owing to Fabricam, or maybe another report is to see what's been my total spend with Fabricam across all my companies over the last year. I might want to negotiate a better deal. So now, instead of printing each company report and finding a way to merge that together, it takes a couple seconds. I just select those companies and I've got a consolidated total report. So it's the same thing when we get into reports by individual company. That's where we get into the report by entity, and we call that a segregated report. So in this case, I've got the same options to print by whatever combination of companies I want. Last time I selected all, but if I leave it blank, it's also going to select all. And you notice my security. I'm only getting access to those companies that I have access to. So I'm going to select Fabricam once again, and I'm going to select my date filter. And I'm going to tell you that these are just the standard out-of-the-box Business Central reports for subledger, for financial reports, but we've added MEM security to it. That way, the users are only ever going to be able to access those companies that they have permissions for. So these are just standard SSRS reports that can be modified as needed. And now this one comes up. Again, you can see these are the companies included, but now it's broken down by individual company. So this is my total for my head office. And as I scroll through, I can see there's my East Coast Commercial Supplies, Maritime Industries, and so on and so forth, all the way through until I reach the end, and then I've got that grand total. So this might be my month-end subledger working paper reports, but I'm never going to get any crossover of data. I'm never going to lose any visibility. I'm always going to have that access, either consolidated or segregated, whatever's most appropriate to me for what I'm looking for here. So this is at the subledger, but the same thing holds true for the financial report. So if I type in balance sheet, for example, once again, I've got a consolidated balance sheet and I've got the balance sheet by entity. So really easy here. If I take the consolidated balance sheet and I'll just use that filter and select preview and select all my companies, it's only going to bring up those same filtered lists of companies. But now I've got my consolidated balance sheet for these companies only. So that's a really important thing to note, is that, you know, those company access need to be available for those individuals that need to see. So if you need to see all companies on your balance sheet, you need to have access to all of those companies. So the same thing with the balance sheet. If I were to run this as a segregated report, I'm going to get individual company reports. The beauty in that is I can select, you know, if I've got a large number of companies, I can run those individual reports just by making those selections in that filter window. So that really makes it easier to get that visibility on your performance very quickly, very easily. This works for all of the subledger reports, all of the financial reports, whether it's balance sheet, income statement, account schedules. And then, you know, a good thing to note too is if you are working with an advanced reporting tool such as whether it's Jet Reports or Power BI or Solver, MEM is going to work perfectly well with those advanced reporting tools as well, because we're basing this on the dimension functionality, so there's no issues there. We've been working with those products for a number of years. So now that's a really high level of how Business Central and MEM work together. So pretty much anything you want to do as far as managing your records and companies can be done in that single transaction window. Then your reports can be consolidated, they could be segregated just by selecting the companies that you want to include. So, you know, really what's so important about this is the outcome. When you can achieve these efficiencies, you have the time, the opportunity to deliver more value to your business, ultimately your customers, and that's really what we're providing here with MEM. So that's going to wrap up our presentation for today. I really want to thank everybody so much for joining us. We're going to have time for some questions now, so I'll turn that over to Angie and see, is there anything in the question box? And if not, you've got time to type those in now.
Thank you, Jerry. At this point, no questions have come through, but like Jerry said, now's the time to get your questions in so we can get those addressed for you.
Angie, I'll take that as a compliment, you know, that the presentation was so detailed that I've covered everything that might have been asked.
That's what I say. All right, well, if nobody has any questions, feel free to reach out to your account manager here at Innovia Consulting, and we would be more than happy to address your concerns and see what we can do to help you. Jerry, I just want to thank you for presenting today.
My pleasure, Angie. And too, if any other questions come up after the fact, or anybody wants to see a more in-depth presentation, and you reach out to your Innovia account manager who will touch base with us, we'd be more than happy to schedule a follow-up with you.
All right, thank you. And thank you for everyone on today's webinar, or if you're watching on demand, we thank you for taking the time out to join us. We do have new training workshops for you and your team members to attend. You can visit our training workshop page at innovia.com/workshops for more information and to register for the training workshop that fits your role. And we do have another upcoming webinar. It's July 27th with True Commerce, and they are going to be presenting on Don't Get Disrupted, how to overcome supply chain challenges with integrated solution. So you can check out our website for more of our upcoming events as we add new events, and that's innovia.com/events. And we do have a podcast going on. If you have not heard of it already, it's called the Innovia Conversation. And we just want to encourage you to listen to the selection that our hosts, Steve Waltz and Jeff Progolski, have provided to us. And you can learn more about the different podcasts at innovia.com/podcast. So check out that selection and subscribe so you'll get notified when those new episodes air. All right, well, I guess they took some more time, and we do have a couple questions, Jerry.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so the first one is, for the company code, is that a global dimension?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We use either Global Dimension 1 or Global Dimension 2 to represent that company code.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the next one is, to be more specific, it's my understanding that there are 2 global dimensions in BC. So if we were to implement MEM, is that an extra global dimension we would get?
Oh, yeah. No, it's not. It's still one of the 2 Business Central global dimensions. So you need to leave one of those available to represent that company value. So in other words, you'll still just have the 2 global dimensions.
Okay, great. Thank you. I hope that helps answer your question for the person who asked that.
Great, thank you.
All right, and again, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to dive deeper into your questions.
Okay, thank you, Angie.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, well, once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another Innovia webinar. Have a great day, everyone, and take care. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.